This is Demiworld. Oh my god! I did. Now I'm taking them to the beach.
That's cute. I love penguins. They're so cute. The best, like, one of my favorite jokes I've ever heard was my old roommate had these Playboys from like the 70s. And like one of the comics in it was a penguin, like an Arctic penguin, but he's like lounging by the pool drinking like a Mai Tai or something. And he goes, I thought I was frigid, but really I was just cold. I thought it was hilarious.
Oh, that's cute. It took me a second to get it.
Yeah, you know, like sexually frigid.
Yeah, I got it. No, I got it. You don't have to mansplain it to me. I got it. I was thinking of the other, you know, frigid, like cold.
I know, that's why.
Words. I got it.
I
got it.
That's why it's so funny.
Okay, so this is Demiworld, the podcast that covers stuff our moms told us not to talk about, but we're going to anyway. I'm Cindy.
I'm Kelly.
And today we're going to talk about some crazy fucking crime scenes. And, oh God, Kelly, I started researching this fucking black hole of bullshit that I'm about to tell you, and I was so sick of it by like day 2, and I was like, I'm balls deep at this point. I have to finish it. I've got to do it. It is so complex, and there's so many different facets to it that I'll try to get through it as fast as I can, but fuck me. Like, there were so many twists and turns that it was just... And I had watched documentaries about it before, but I guess I had kind of forgotten parts of it, but oh, Lord. Okay.
Oh, tell me about it.
Okay, here we go. So, in the early morning hours of December 9th, 2001, a call comes into the Durham, North Carolina Emergency Dispatch, and a very panicked man on the other end tells the dispatcher that his wife has fallen down the stairs. The dispatcher asks him, how many stairs did she fall down? He says, I don't know, 15, 20? And he hangs up the phone. So she's like, okay. He calls back several minutes later, demands to know where the ambulance is. And there's this strange clicking that I noticed on the 911 call because they play it constantly on these different documentaries. And I was like, what is that sound? But nobody ever mentions it, which I thought was interesting. So the man repeats several times that she's still breathing and wants to know where the ambulance is. He can't answer certain questions like, is she conscious? He's like, it's like, how can you not answer that question? Aren't you near the body like most people would be when they're calling 911? And he's on a cordless phone. So about 8 minutes after the initial 911 call, the paramedics arrive and they find Kathleen Peterson dead at the foot of the stairs. So due to the really gruesome nature of the scene, the paramedics become suspicious and they tell the police that they don't think that she simply fell down the stairs, so that it looks more like a homicide to them. And the investigators agree. Detective Arthur Holland of the Durham Police Department, he comes in, he assesses the scene, and it's about 3 o'clock in the morning now. And they find that 48-year-old Kathleen Peterson lying at the foot of the narrow staircase in a pool of blood. And the walls around, so it's like 3 stairs up to a little landing thing, and then another like 18, 20 stairs going up, and it's very narrow. It's at the back of this gigantic house. And there's just, on this little landing, there's just blood everywhere. There's blood all over the walls, probably about maybe a foot high. There's blood spray up to 9 feet high up onto the walls surrounding the staircase. There's no blood actually in the narrow part, just at the foot of the stairs. And they're like, it looks like she's been bludgeoned to death. So they start asking Michael Peterson, like, what happened this evening? And he's like, well, we had dinner. We watched a movie. Our son went to a Christmas party. And we were celebrating that one of my books, he's a writer, was going to get turned into a movie. And they went out onto the patio where the pool is and had wine. They'd been drinking wine all evening. And she said she got chilly at about 2 o'clock in the morning. She went back inside. I stayed out to smoke a pipe, like rich people do. And he goes in about 45 minutes later and finds her at the foot of the stairs lying in a pool of blood, and he says, unresponsive. So about 3 o'clock in the morning, right after the police arrive, Michael's youngest son, Todd, arrives home from a Christmas party and tells the police that his stepmom is a heavy drinker and takes Valium regularly to help her sleep. So maybe that's how she fell down the stairs. She was intoxicated and she slipped. She was wearing thin flip-flops and she slipped and she died on the stairs. So I'm going to tell this story out of order now because my notes say one thing, but I'm like thinking ahead of myself. So I might be repeating myself a little bit, but I wanted to know, like, can people fall down stairs, like foot of the stairs, and die basically from exsanguination, die from loss of blood? And it turns out they can.
Was it carpeted or tile?
No, it's hardwood.
Okay.
Hardwood. So I looked it up. There's a German paper that was published in Forensic Science International. There's probably about 7 or 8 German scientists who looked at a bunch of cases and found that most falls on stairs happen to men at the age over 50, and a lot of people who fall on stairs are either intoxicated or they die before they fall. So they have a stroke or a heart attack.
Right.
Yeah, and the correlation between people being intoxicated and people being dead while falling is that they have no reflexes. Their reflexes are either very stunted or they're just none because they're dead. So they fall usually backwards. If they're going upstairs, they're going to fall and they're going to hit the back of their head. There's a thing called the hat brim rule, which is where your hat would sit on your head. Most blunt force trauma inflicted by a third person will occur to the top of the head, and falling downstairs will happen to the back of the head. So people who end up getting big scalp wounds bleed a lot, and they can actually bleed to death. So with people who are falling at ground floor while intoxicated or dead will appear to have a lot of defensive wounds on the back of their hands because they have no reflex response. They're not trying to catch themselves.
Yeah, there's
so a lot of the wounds a lot of the wounds will happen to the back of their forearms and hands, not to their palms, because they're just falling.
Right.
And that's what it looks like with Kathleen Peterson. She's got what looks like to be a lot of defensive wounds on the back of her head. She's got little tiny cuts on her face, which a lot of people when they're falling downstairs get really bad facial injuries. She didn't have that, but she also just probably fell backwards or, so down the stairs. This is what Michael Peterson's saying anyways. So the police note that Todd Peterson, the son, and Michael Peterson appear to be in total shock. But Michael's acting a little bit strange, which, is here or there. People panic and grieve in all sorts of different ways.
And he was drinking too, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And he's muttering to himself. He's picking up things and setting them back down. He keeps going into his study where his computer is and playing on his computer. Finally, the cops are like, you can't be on your computer. You can't be on this is a crime scene. Like, you can't be on your computer. We don't know what's happened yet. Get off your computer. So he doesn't like fight with them about it or anything. So let's talk a little bit about Kathleen Peterson. So Kathleen Peterson was really intelligent and very successful. She excelled in both math and science and was the first woman admitted to Duke University's engineering program in 1977. And this is where I say, good on you, Duke. Good on you for allowing a woman into your engineering department in 1977. You had to wait 70 fucking years to do that. Good job. Good on you. Let's see. This is where she met her first husband and married him and had their daughter Caitlin. And then that marriage ends when Kathleen discovers that the hubs is stepping out on her. He's cheating. So Kathleen and Caitlin move to Durham, and she takes a job at Nortel where she climbs to the position of executive vice president. And probably when I'm not really sure when they got married. They'd been married for 4 years when she died, so probably like 1993 or so. So Michael Peterson, newly divorced, moves into her neighborhood, and he has 2 biological children, Todd and Clayton, and 2 adoptive daughters, Martha and Margaret. And they totally hit it off. Their kids like each other. For all everybody involved said that they had a really good relationship. They had lavish parties. They seemed to get along really well. And Michael Peterson was a very successful author of military intrigue novels. He was a former Marine, and he served in Vietnam, although he had all these accolades, which we kind of found out weren't necessarily that true, like his Purple Hearts and stuff. Like, he didn't really have any paperwork to back that up, but, you know, people tend to embellish their wartime stuff sometimes.
I guess. They call that stolen valor, by the way.
Oh, okay. Well,
it really pisses people off.
It should, you know, but, you know, over a couple beers, you might embellish some of those fishing stories, because at that point they are fishing stories, because they didn't fucking happen. So one of his early titles rockets him to fame, and he purchases this 8,000 square foot home in Durham, and Kathleen and him were pretty much like North Carolina royalty because of how successful they were, and they were very friendly with everybody and had these big parties. So that at the time of Kathleen's death, they'd been married for only 4 years. Let's see. There's some weird gaps in the timeline that he gives, and I tried to find a good timeline online to see exactly when things happened where, but he's the only person that we have that can give any sort of, you know, account, and he's also the prime suspect, so it's not really, you know, it's hearsay kind of, because it doesn't really add up. There's gaps missing. So, like he said that around 10:30 or so, Todd leaves for the party, and 45 minutes after Kathleen goes inside, he goes inside and finds her. But what we do know is that Kathleen logged into Michael's computer using the password Atwater, which is her daughter's last name from the previous marriage. And that says to me that she has her own login, which means that she might have her own like entry point into the computer. Like, she's not really going to see a lot of his stuff.
Right. It'll like log into her
user.
Her
user. Yeah, her user account. And she speaks with a colleague just after 11 p.m. about sending her an email file. Usually she would do this on her work laptop, but she left it at work. So she's having to use her husband's computer, which she doesn't normally do. At 11:53, the email arrives, but it's never opened. So this is all before they supposedly go out onto the patio to have more wine. So the police are convinced that Michael Peterson has killed his wife because of the bloody scene, but they don't have a murder weapon and they don't have any motive yet. So they start hunting around, and they discover in his office, on his computer, there are thousands, not hundreds, but multiple thousands of images of gay porn. Some of which have been printed out and have drops of blood on them.
Oh.
Yes. A bunch of it had been deleted recently, and they were able to recover it, because you can do that on computers. Everybody, you can get recovered files on your computer. Just because you delete it doesn't mean it's gone. Unless it's an Apple, then it's gone forever. So be careful what you delete on an Apple. So if, on your PC, careful now. They also find a bunch of correspondence between Michael Peterson and a male escort. And the male escort does testify in court later on at the trial, but he never went to actually meet Michael Peterson. He just didn't feel like going that day, so he just didn't go. He stood him up, basically. But it would be possible. So the email comes into Michael Peterson's email, not Kathleen's. So it is possible that even if she couldn't see the gay porn on the computer because she was in her own login, if she's in his inbox, she might find the correspondence between the male escort, which, if we look at her previous marriage, where she ended for infidelity, we can say that she wasn't too keen on her husband fucking men.
Right, or fucking anyone.
Or fucking anyone, exactly. Just fucking outside, fucking someone other than her.
Right.
Exactly. So they also find out that they are in debt of $130,000. Michael hasn't sold a book in quite a while. Kathleen's the main breadwinner. They have 3 daughters in college. Their 2 adult sons are still financially dependent on them. That if she did discover any of this potentially infidelity sort of stuff, that she lost her shit. They got into an argument. He bludgeons her on the stairs and waits to call the police because she'd been lying there for about 90 minutes before the police were called. That's where this whole thing, he said about 45 minutes. It was probably longer than that for her to bleed to death. It was probably more an hour and a half.
Okay.
The autopsy finds 7 really deep lacerations on the back of Kathleen's head, which causes her to bleed to death. So ultimately, it's blunt force trauma that kills her because it leads to the bleeding to death. They find what appear to be defensive wounds on her hands and her arms. She has a fractured thyroid cartilage in her neck, which typically happens with whiplash.
Okay.
Her skull is not fractured, and there's no intracranial bleeding, which is untypical of blunt force trauma, especially if you're being bludgeoned. Usually it cracks your skull. Her blood alcohol level is 0.07, which is below the legal limit for impairment. And there are trace amounts of Valium in her system, not enough to cause her to be inebriated. But you can argue that she might have been more inebriated as she lay there dying for 90 minutes, and her body's still metabolizing the alcohol and the Valium, possibly.
Right.
Okay, so now the police need to find a murder weapon that is hard enough to cause deep lacerations, but flexible enough not to damage the skull. So up until this point of the autopsy, Michael and Kathleen's families are both backing his innocence. When the autopsy findings are published, Kathleen's sister, Candace, and her daughter, Caitlin, side with the prosecution. Like, you fucking killed my sister, you killed my mom, you're a monster. Murder charges are brought against Michael Peterson, and the state starts building their case. There's also some people who think there's a possible conspiracy with the police going after Peterson the way they did because he had a weekly column in the local Durham newspaper where he went after the powers that be on a regular basis, and some of those were the cops. So some people think that they're going after him because he made fun of them publicly. Of course, the police say this is silly. Of course not. The man's the only person home when his wife dies. There's no intruder. She looks like she obviously has been bludgeoned. The autopsy says she's been bludgeoned to death. He murdered her. We're not going after him because he wrote some shitty articles. We're going after him because he's a murderer. So Michael hires David Rudolph, who is a high-profile attorney, to represent him. And Rudolph, in turn, hires renowned forensic scientist Henry Lee to refute the state's claim that Kathleen was bludgeoned to death and instead fell down the stairs. Lee argues that the blood spatter was deposited on the walls when bloody hair fell over Kathleen's face and she either coughed, sneezed, or exhaled, sending the blood high up onto the walls. A biomedical expert, Ferris Bandak, is brought in to create several computer simulations that would explain how Kathleen received the injuries while falling down the stairs. And they said that it wasn't 7 unique blows that caused the 7 lacerations, but 3 unique blows that caused her skull to split. And since she was at ground level, she didn't fall as far as someone would if they tumbled head over heels down the stairs, causing injury to the skull. But the most damning evidence against Michael Peterson is given by a guy named Dwayne Deaver, who is a blood technician who presents several scenarios as to how Michael attacked Kathleen on the stairs during an argument where she wanted to end the marriage after discovering Michael's infidelities. Deaver testifies that the only way Kathleen's blood could have ended up on the staircase the way it did was if she had been bludgeoned while someone stood over her. This would mean that whoever stood over here would have had blood on them. from cast off. Of course, Michael and his son both, that's the other problem with people falling down the stairs, is that by the time people arrive to photograph the scene, the body's most likely been moved, because people are trying to, give some sort of resuscitation or, aid. So you're never really sure if a person, when they're lying on the stairs, if that was how they landed or if that is a result of them being moved. So it's really hard to gauge, for scientists to gauge, like, what it looks like when someone falls on the stairs and is lying, undisturbed, because most people have been disturbed. So they have both, like, touched her, so they would naturally both have blood on them. So it's kind of like, well, is it tampering with the scene if he goes to his wife and holds her after he's bludgeoned her, or because he sees her needing aid? Like, what's the right answer here? So let's see. When the investigators arrived at Peterson's home, Michael was barefoot, yet his shoes had blood on the bottom of them, and they also found a partial bloody shoe print on the back of one of Kathleen's sweatpants, and it is ascertained that Michael held down Kathleen with his foot while he hit her. In crime scene photos, there's shoes that look like they've been taken off by the foot of the stairs, but they're scattered all over, and there's blood everywhere. So it's possible that perhaps the blood got on there by accident. We really don't know what happened there. It's possible that he just held her down with his foot. The defense argues that Kathleen knows about the extramarital affairs, and they have a special agreement, and Michael can go off and do his thing with men, and she doesn't mind, which everybody on Kathleen's side of the family, including her daughter, say bullshit.
Yeah, I mean, you gotta love defense and prosecution. Like, there could never ever be more of, like, different sides of the story every time.
Oh, I know. So the defense is really trying to plant reasonable doubt in the minds of the jury.
That's what their job is.
That's their job, exactly. To either exonerate or reasonable doubt. So now a huge twist enters. In 1983, while Michael Peterson and his first wife were living in Germany, they befriend a woman named Elizabeth Ratliff. Elizabeth is married and has 2 young daughters by the name of Margaret and Martha. Elizabeth's husband dies suddenly, and the Petersons encourage Elizabeth to move into the house across the street from them so they can help her with the kids. On the morning of 1985, Elizabeth's nanny arrives to find the door unlocked and Elizabeth lying at the foot of the stairs in a pool of blood. The nanny says she feels for a pulse and the body still feels warm, but Elizabeth is already dead, so she runs over to the Petersons to call the police. By the time the police arrive, Michael Peterson is at Elizabeth's house and has taken charge of the situation. He tells the police that Elizabeth had been suffering from headaches for a few days before the apparent fall down the stairs, and that she also suffered from a blood condition related to hemophilia, which would explain all the blood. An autopsy determines that Elizabeth had blood on her brain and that she must have suffered from a stroke which caused her to fall. The death is ruled an accident and no real investigation is performed. However, friends and neighbors of Elizabeth and the Petersons are instantly suspicious of Michael Peterson and how he's acting when the police arrive. A witness to the incident writes a letter to the police or to the prosecution during Michael's trial, saying that he saw a man, or she saw a man, running from Elizabeth's house in the middle of the night. So Elizabeth ultimately leaves her $35,000 estate to the Petersons and custody of her 2 daughters, who the Petersons later adopt. They can't really find any motive for this murder because they were, $35,000 isn't that much money. And plus you get 2 daughters to take care of, so I don't really know what that would be motive. I wouldn't want more kids to take care of, to tell you the truth. I've got my hands full.
Yeah, $35,000 is not going to cover that cost of 2 extra children.
Hell no, it's not. Especially when they need some trauma, like, counseling after their mothers died on the stairs. Let's see. Elizabeth is buried in Texas, which I'm assuming is where she's from. And the prosecution wants to exhume the body in order to examine it for this new case. However, in order to do that, they need to get permission from the family, which would be the 2 daughters that Michael Peterson has raised. But in another twist, the girls agree because they want to exonerate their adopted father of any charges between their biological mother's death and their stepmother's death. So a new autopsy is performed on Elizabeth Ratliff, and when the back of her head is shaved, the medical examiner finds 7 deep lacerations that look very much like the lacerations on Kathleen's head. However, and her skull is cracked. So the judge says, okay, we can go ahead and enter in Elizabeth Ratliff's this evidence into this case against Michael Peterson. So the defense is like shitting themselves at this point because now they've got this another weird murder on their hands, maybe by the hands of this man. So a really creepy fun fact, it's not fun, it's a creepy fact. Elizabeth Ratliff and Kathleen Peterson could be fucking identical twins. They look more like each other than Kathleen and her sister Candace do. They look like they're the same woman. When I was watching the documentary, they put up a picture of Elizabeth, and I thought I was looking at a picture of Kathleen. It was weird. They look exactly alike.
It's creepy.
So now Candace comes to the house after her sister's death and is looking around, and she knows that they don't have the murder weapon, and she starts wondering where the blowpoke is. Do you know what a blowpoke is? You grew up in fireplace areas. Do you know?
Is that like for the fireplace, like the like the stoker or whatever?
Yeah, exactly. And you can blow into one end of it. It's like a thin,
like billow type thing.
No, it's not like a billow. So it's like a fireplace poker. It's the same shape as one, but instead the handle of it, the rod part, is hollow. It's wrapped copper usually. So you have the same kind of hook at one end where you can move the embers around, but you can also blow through it into the fire. It's got a hole,
right?
So you can, stoke the fire that way.
Interesting.
She notices theirs is missing, so she bought one for herself and her sister at the same time and gave one to Kathleen for their fireplace, but she can't find it, and she tells the police, like, this is the perfect weapon to bludgeon somebody and probably not break their skull. It's light, it's flexible, but still sturdy enough to split someone's skull open. So now they start trying to find this blowpoke, and they cannot find the Petersons' blowpoke anywhere. So they believe that, of course, it's the murder weapon and it's been disposed of somewhere. Towards the end of this 2-year trial, which is the longest in North Carolina history.
That's a long trial. I mean,
that's a long fucking trial. That's a long trial.
Isn't that longer than O.J. Simpson, I think?
Probably, because that was oh man, and they were both like very highly publicized too because they're famous people in both instances. I don't know how long OJ's was, but it was a fucking zoo for sure.
I don't think it was 2 years though. That's a long time.
Yeah, a long time. So during the trial, towards the end of it, the defense, in a stunning Perry Mason moment, reveals the Petersons' blowpoke. It had been in the basement the whole time, covered in bugs and dirt and dust, and the tip of it had been broken off, which made it look like a giant curtain rod. And it does. They look like curtain rods. They sound like curtain rods when you knock them over because there's the coiled,
right,
stuff in there. And they were saying, like, it couldn't have been the blowpoke. The blowpoke's got no hair, no blood, no tissue, no DNA on it. It's been sitting in this basement for God knows how long, probably because it's broken. So now the prosecution's like, bullshit, you planted that there, that's not the real blowpoke. And if it is the real blowpoke, the reason it's broken is because you hit your wife with it. And that's why it's broken, even though there's no evidence that it was used in a murder. Okay, so on October 10th, 2003, 2 years after Kathleen Peterson dies, Michael Peterson is found guilty of first-degree murder and is sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. On January 16th, 2004, Superior Court Judge Orlando Hudson rules in favor of Caitlin Atwater, Kathleen's daughter, in a wrongful death lawsuit, saying that Michael Peterson is financially liable for Kathleen Peterson's death, and she is awarded $35 million. Shortly afterwards, Michael Peterson files for bankruptcy. So, in another twist, in a completely unrelated case to this one, Dwayne Deaver, that blood technician guy, remember him? He was the reason that Michael Peterson went to prison. Turns out he's a big fat fucking liar. So in 2010, Deaver's test results, I don't think he testified, but his test results put a man named Greg Taylor behind bars for life for a crime he did not commit. And he's just one of many people who have been exonerated after Dwayne Deaver's big fat lying bullshit came to light. The evidence presented by Deaver claimed that a substance found on Taylor's car was blood. And it tied him to the murder of a woman who, she was murdered in this cul-de-sac. His car got stuck in the mud. He and his buddy were high and they were four-buying. Car gets stuck in the mud. They go home to sleep it off. He comes back the next day. Cops are like, "What are you doing here?" "Getting my car." "You killed this woman. There's something on your car." So, okay, so it's blood. However, it's not human blood. It's animal blood. But that wasn't put in the report. The report from Dwayne Deaver just said it was blood. So a man goes to prison for murder when it was animal blood on his car, not human blood. And it turns out that Dwayne Deaver, in about 200 cases, he lied, basically. He reported false evidence. And he also said that it was part of the Durham County's police department or their law enforcement to not report negative findings. So this goes back to the shirt that Michael Peterson's wearing the night his wife is murdered. There's no blood on it at all. There's no blood on it. So unless he somehow changed his shirt and got rid of it, there's no way he could have bludgeoned his wife on the stairs. His lawyers, Peterson's lawyers, want to get a retrial. They want a new trial for him because obviously this is tainted evidence.
Right, yeah.
And it turns out that all of the evidence from the trial has not been stored correctly and everything's been touching each other. So now everything's cross-contaminated. So they can't retrial because there's zero evidence of anything now. Everything's been cross-contaminated. So instead, they offer him an Alford plea. An Alford plea is where you plead guilty to the crime and you are released from prison on time served. And you are still considered a felon because you plead guilty, which Michael Peterson had never done. He never ever said that he was guilty of the crime, but it was either that or stay in prison for the rest of his life. So he takes the plea and he's free. So I haven't talked about the most spectacular part of this case yet, but I'm going to talk about 4 different theories, one of which is mine. The last one's my theory, but there's 3 main theories as to how Kathleen Peterson died. Number 1, Michael Peterson murdered his wife in a fit of rage when he saw his meal ticket walking out of the house after discovering his infidelities and his double life. That's number 1. Number 2, Kathleen falls down the stairs while intoxicated, hits her head, and bleeds to death. I already talked about that. That's it. She falls down the stairs, intoxicated, bleeds to death. He finds her. Okay. Number 3, an owl did it. Okay. So, in 2008, Lawrence Pollard, a neighbor and lawyer of the Petersons, not their lawyer, but he's a lawyer and happens to be their neighbor, of the Petersons, began looking at the evidence because he thought Michael Peterson was innocent, and found that in addition to Kathleen's own hair that was in her hands, which is typical of a head wound, you hit your head, you touch your head, you pull away, you've got hair on your hand. But this hair had root ball in it, which meant that it had been ripped from her head. So it wasn't just like a cut and the hair had been broken from blunt force trauma. It actually had been pulled from her head. And along with this, there were 3 microscopic owl feathers present and a few twigs and leaves. Pollard had the feathers tested and found that they belonged to a barred owl, which is the 2nd largest owl in North Carolina, and also one of the most territorial little fuckers you can come across. They routinely attack people who come near their nesting sites. And what they do is they attack the back of the head. They get on the head with their talons and peck at your face. So he postulates that Kathleen went outside for some reason, maybe to put up some more Christmas ornaments. The owl attacks her, which were nesting in the yard, the trees near their house. She goes back inside, and there are drops of blood on the walkway leading into the house and a bloody smear on the door jamb on the outside, which the prosecution said was Peterson leaving the house to get rid of the murder weapon. That was how the blood dripped from the murder weapon, and he touched the door jamb, and that was how that blood got there. But this guy speculated it was Kathleen coming back into the house after being attacked by the owl. She then is losing a lot of blood and kind of in shock, falls on the stairs. So she does fall on the stairs, and that's where she bleeds to death and dies. And he talks to a couple ornithologists. Is that right? Bird people? Ornithologists?
I think that's right. It was a Jeopardy question this week, but that was not a good show for us. But yeah, I think that sounds about right.
And they said, it's not unplausible that someone could actually, after, having alcohol in their system and being attacked pretty badly by this bird, that they could, die by bleeding to death, like, especially if they're slightly intoxicated. And when you look at the wounds on the back of her head, it does look like a fucking bird's talon. It does. It looks like a talon went and just scraped the back of her head and cut it clean open. So, yeah, the owl theory is what I thought originally got him out of prison, but it actually never made it because there was no retrial, and the defense was kind of like, I don't know if we want to
go down that road.
Yeah, that seems a little hinky. We may not win with that. So here's my fourth possibility. Kathleen finds the emails, confronts her husband. They argue. Fight. She goes outside to leave, is attacked by the bird, comes back inside, falls on the stairs, pushes her husband away. Get the fuck off me. I don't want you around me. Falls on the stairs, and he lets her bleed to death.
Okay.
Maybe?
Yeah, sure.
I mean, it'll just put it all together. It's like sandwich it up in a nice little club sandwich and have everything in there. But yeah, oh man, I was so sick of this case. I was like, there's too much information.
I think it's really interesting, the owl theory, and I think it's probably plausible. The only hang up I have in this case is that other lady in Germany. It seems,
yes.
Although what's the
yes.
thing? It's like once is an accident, twice a coincidence, and 3 times is a pattern. So maybe twice is just a coincidence.
Yeah, and I mean, it's so hard to tell. I mean, a lot of people are like, what? He's a fucking murderer. Fuck him. He got what he deserves. He shouldn't be out. Other people are like, oh, the owl theory, that's awfully, not convenient, but wow, like stranger shit's happened.
Right.
And, she did have twigs and stuff. This was
she had
totally
owl
disregarded.
Feathers in her hair. Like, how does one...
Yeah, microscopic ones, which are on the feet of owls.
Right, yeah, I mean...
So it's just like, people are like, well, it could have come from her down pillow. It's like, they don't put barbed owl feathers
and yeah. No, they,
she could have fallen out.
Animals
she could have just fallen outside, too.
Right.
She could have, like, stumbled or something and fallen and gotten twigs and leaves in her hair. Or they were fighting out there.
Right.
I mean, if your wife is dead and you just, maybe all that happened, they fought and she gets attacked by the owl, comes in, dies, but he's already outside smoking and he's out there a lot longer than 45 minutes because he's pissed and doesn't know what to do. And then he goes inside and finds her dead. You're not going to tell the cops you were arguing.
No, of course not. My God.
Because they already think that you did it because you're the only person home.
And then in your mind, you're like, that's irrelevant anyway because I didn't kill her. So no reason to even let them know we were fighting.
Right. So I have no idea how she died. I don't know if she was murdered. I don't know if it was an accident. I just don't know. Yeah. But it's a crazy crime scene. It's crazy that there would be that much blood from someone falling down the stairs at ground level. But according to this paper by these German scientists, a lot of times when people fall at ground level on stairs, it looks like they've been bludgeoned to death by a third party, when in actuality, they've just fallen down the stairs.
Right.
So it's, I don't know. I don't know who did it. I don't know.
I don't know if we'll ever know.
Tell me yours. I want to know yours.
Speaks. Well,
I know, fucking owl.
Mine's kind of similar in that I don't know who did it. So my case is about Rebecca Zahau, and she was 32 years old when she died, July 13th, 2011, in Coronado, California. She was found dead at her house, or it was her boyfriend's rented house. It was like a beach house. Her boyfriend was this really wealthy guy who started this pharmaceutical company that was worth like $1 billion. So he's really wealthy, and they had like this lovely mansion beach house in Coronado, California. So she is found hanging outside from a second-story balcony. She's gagged. Her hands are bound behind her back with rope. Her feet are bound. She's nude, and she's hanging like 6 to 7 feet from the balcony, and the rope is tied to the bed in the bedroom that she was in. So the crime scene itself, so that's like obviously a big part of the crime scene, that situation there outside. And then in the bedroom itself, where she had jumped from, it was determined to be a suicide.
Really?
It was. So
how?
We'll go through it, but and then we'll see.
When I decide to commit suicide, I'm going to definitely tie my hands behind my back, gag myself, run naked off of a balcony with a sheet around my neck or whatever it was tied to the bed. That's, I'm going to set somebody up for my murder, perhaps.
Well, people do it for like insurance reasons, or
did she have insurance? Was she insured?
I don't know. I don't know if it really mattered if she was, because her boyfriend was so wealthy, and I don't know who like the recipient or the beneficiary would have been. I don't know if she had a life insurance policy. People do that though so that they can't back out of committing suicide. Like they tie their hands up so they can't, when they're hanging there, do anything to help themselves.
Oh God, that's awful.
Or they do it to make it look like a homicide or to set someone up. In the bedroom they found 2 knives that she had used rope. They're calling it like a water sport rope. I don't know if it's for like a rope for water skiing or something, but it was that kind of rope.
Yeah, probably.
And she had cut the rope in segments, and only her fingerprints and DNA were found on the ropes in the bedroom. Everywhere her footprints were found on the balcony, no one else's. And then there was on one of the knives there was menstrual blood, but I think it's just speculated that she had taken a shower, she never got dressed, and she was kind of walking around bleeding on things a little bit. So the other really interesting thing about the crime scene is that on the bedroom door, she had written a note, and some people are calling it a suicide note, and some people are just calling it a note. And we will discuss that because it's really strange. So the only other person on the property at the time was her boyfriend's brother, and his name was Adam Shacknai, and he called 911. But first, he actually found her, he said, cut her down, tried CPR, unbound her hands, and then he called 911, and he said it was a suicide when he called 911. He said, I got a girl here who hanged herself. So considering that's what you walk into, I think that it's a pretty interesting choice of words to determine that she had killed herself, considering it could look like a homicide. So that's how she was discovered. And a little backstory to this case is 2 days prior, she was watching her boyfriend's 6-year-old son. And he had a fatal injury in that house. He had somehow gone over the railing of a second-story balcony on the inside of the house. And
that's awful.
And took a chandelier down with him and landed on the floor.
Oh.
And he was still alive. And he was taken to the hospital, but in critical condition, and I believe he was unresponsive. I mean, he was in a coma. And she says that when she found him, he had said the word of her dog. And so the speculation is that somehow the dog, he tripped on the dog, went over the railing, or he was on his scooter and went over the railing. I don't know, it's just really weird. And when I think about this scene, I think about the movie War of the Roses with Kathleen Turner and Michael Douglas. You know, like at the end when they go over the balcony and they land in the chandelier. Like, that's not an easy thing to happen. Like, how does one just fly over a balcony and land in a chandelier? It's really strange. And I believe that the boy's mother really felt like Rebecca was responsible for what had happened to her son. And I think that she even thought that maybe she had, like, thrown him over the balcony. She wasn't really convinced it was an accident. And so Rebecca Zahau, 32 years old, she's a Burmese immigrant, and her boyfriend is, like, this guy who's 20 years older than her, and he's this white guy, like, billionaire. So the police determined it to be a suicide because of the lack of DNA and fingerprints, but her parents really couldn't believe that that's what had happened. So no criminal charges were ever filed, and they couldn't be because it was ruled a suicide. So her parents filed a civil case, which, again, this is kind of like O.J. Simpson, where he was found not guilty at a criminal trial, and Ron Goldman and Nicole Brown's parents took out a civil lawsuit against him, a wrongful death lawsuit. So her parents bring about a civil lawsuit against Adam Shacknai, who was the only person on the property that night. And I have a problem for the reasons for doing it. Her parents brought the civil suit because, and I quote, she wasn't suicidal. And I just have a problem with that because I think that parents are probably really subjective and don't want to believe that their children could, be having problems or struggling with things like that. And, they're like, no, you don't get it. She's super Christian. She's never talked about suicide. She's never been depressed. It could never, ever, ever happen. Not even a possibility. And I just think that's bullshit because, if she's depressed and suicidal, her parents might not be the people she goes to support, considering that it seems like that's their view on things. Like, I don't know if they'd be the best people to handle it. So they have this Adam Shacknai is actually found guilty. In the civil case? In the civil case, yeah.
Okay.
So they claimed the petitioner in the civil suit, I guess, which would be like the prosecution in a criminal case. So the petitioner claimed that because she fell 6 feet or more, that a fall like that would have either decapitated her or broken her neck. And then the other issue they had is the bed that she was tied to didn't move very much when she jumped off of the balcony. And they say that it would have moved a lot more if she had just jumped, as opposed to, I think they're saying that she was, like, lowered.
Right.
Although I don't know why that guy, if he did kill her, just wouldn't throw her over the balcony. And that the bedroom was wiped down. And, of course, just like any case, everyone had expert witnesses, and the expert witnesses testified exactly how that side wanted them to testify. So there's evidence for both sides that he did do it or didn't do it. It's just kind of, I guess, what you believe. I don't really know. What we do know is that she died between 12:50 a.m. and 6:50 a.m. So the 911 call came in at 6:50 a.m. And she retrieved a voice message on her phone at 12:50 a.m. from her boyfriend, The message was deleted and never retrieved, but her boyfriend said that he had left her a message saying that his son was not going to recover, and that I believe they're like getting the organ donation stuff lined up because he was not expected to survive much longer.
Okay, so by the time between her attempted or like supposed suicide and the son being hurt is within a very short amount of time of one another.
Yeah, like a day and a half.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So then the speculation is that she was distraught over the fact that she was in charge of this young boy and he is dying and she is now going to kill herself about it. So the thing that I find most fascinating about this crime scene is she painted this note on the door. And I sent you a picture. Did you have it in your site?
I did see it. I don't have it up right now, but I did see it. Okay,
bring it up because we're going to talk about it. So people are calling it a suicide note. It doesn't really, I don't know what it points to. So like a little backstory on Cindy and I, or me and Cindy, which backstory on me and Cindy. We got our undergrad degrees in English literature together, and we had a lovely semester where we learned all about Miss Emily Dickinson, the poet.
I love Emily Dickinson, actually.
Love her so much. The most. Remember when we got that Ouija board so we could summon her spirit? Yeah, okay. Story for
I do remember that.
Remember when we stole the Ouija board from that person's like death site?
I do. That was really probably not a very good idea.
From that shrine.
Yep.
And then when I told Ian about it, he made me remove it from the house immediately. Anyway, so the note that she painted on the door in black paint, the note says, it's 2 lines. First line is, she saved him. And the second one is, can you save her? Now, it's written in all caps, and there's no punctuation. So that's why it reminds me of an Emily Dickinson poem. Because it could mean a million things. She saved him. Can you save her? And the S in the she looks like it's not as sharp as the other letters. It almost looks like it could have been added later. So some people think it actually originally read, he saved him. Can you save her? And someone added this S later.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So knowing what we know about this case, this little boy is lying in the hospital dying. We have this woman, and she's obviously very distraught. And of course, they had an expert witness at the civil case saying that this Adam Shacknai painted the message. But if we think that she did it, like what message is she trying to convey?
I don't know. Did they know where she got the black paint? Was there black paint in the room?
There was, and she was like
okay.
And she painted like she was.
Okay.
Like she was painted as a hobby.
Okay. She saved him. Can you save her?
So saved him. Is the him the little boy? Do we think?
Possibly, and the her might be her.
And then who is the you? And why would she write it in third person? That's the other reason why people think that she didn't write it, is that why didn't she write, I saved him, can you save me?
Did you look it up at all to see if it is like a reference to something that's obscure, maybe?
That is a really great point. I actually never did. I mean, it could be like a line from a book or like from a poem or something. Right.
Or even something that she said. Like something that she, I don't know.
Right, like
inside thing.
Yeah, someone might understand what it was, but no one really came forward with what that information meant.
Yeah, it does look like the S was added later because there's already 2 S's in saved, and it's different than the S on the front of the he, and can is very hard to read.
Yeah, the only reason I thought the S was maybe a little funky was because it would have been the first brushstroke, and maybe the bristles weren't fully coated in paint, and so it was lighter than the rest.
Good point. But if someone who painted as a hobby would you think they'd go over it again, because it looks like some of these things were gone over, like the he looks like the first he.
Right.
The H has gone over a couple of times, and it doesn't look like somebody who paints regularly
Right.
painted this.
Well, and
It's hard to read.
And the speculation is that it's higher up than what her height was. Like, for her to naturally paint that she would have done it lower. Like, she would have had to raise her arm up to do this. But the Adam Shacknai who was on the property, they're saying it was at his height level. So the other thing I find interesting about this is that he admitted that. So the speculation, I think, based on the state of her body when they found her in the morning, was that they put her time frame of death around 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
Adam Shacknai admitted to the police that he watched Asian bondage porn at 3 o'clock that morning.
Oh, that's convenient.
I mean, it's either a coincidence or...
specifically Asian bondage porn. And she's Asian.
And she was
Burmese. Is that what you said?
Yeah,
from Burmese.
And she was bounded. And they found paint on her nipples.
Oh, that's like black paint?
Like the paint that she painted on the door.
Or somebody painted on the door.
That paint was also found on her nipples. So they think that he had tweaked her nipples. So I think initially I just really felt like, this really seems like a suicide just based on the previous circumstances that had been happening personally with her. However, the Asian bondage porn is really quite a coincidence that around the same time that she died, that's the kind of porn he decided that he was going to watch that night. So maybe
that's really troublesome. It's troublesome.
It is, because I'm thinking the other thing too we could speculate is he didn't kill her, but he was on the guest house of the property, which was across the courtyard from the balcony that she was hanging from. Is that he saw her hanging there like that, and it turned him on, and he jacked off to it. And then a few hours later, he called 911 because he didn't give a shit that she killed herself because his nephew was dying. Or was going to die.
Or it could be retribution. Like, he sees her walking around up there naked, and he goes over and things go kind of south. I don't know. But only her DNA and fingerprints and stuff are on the stuff used. I don't know. That's really interesting.
But, if he was wearing gloves or he wiped things down. Because I think the other thing, too, was when he found her in the morning, he cut her down and tried to perform CPR before he called 911, which anyone who knows anything about homicides would know that that's a great way to really mess up all of your evidence.
Well, yeah, that was brought up in the Michael Peterson thing, too, was that, he moved the body to, like...
Right.
He was holding her when the paramedics arrived.
Same with JonBenet Ramsey. I mean, those parents could have disrupted that crime scene more. And
also, we should have discussed this last week. They invited their fucking friends over. Like, the house was full of people that should not have been there.
Oh, yeah. The Ramseys? So,
yeah.
That was like, that would have been a great one to discuss with crime scenes because, my God, what a disaster. But,
yeah.
So, his family is claiming that she killed herself for retribution. And I shit you not, they called it what is that? This is like a stereotype about Asian honor, and that's what they called it. Like, that's what his family, her boyfriend's family called it. It's, out of Asian honor, she killed herself because she couldn't live with the fact that she let this little boy die in her care.
Wow.
And her family is saying that the brother...
Go fuck yourself?
The brother of her boyfriend killed her out of retribution for her being negligent.
Well, I wonder what his background is. I wonder if he had any background in mild or even not mild sexual assault. Did he ever come on to her before? Did he ever... make advances in any way, shape, or form to his, at his brother's girlfriends.
We don't know, And the thing is, too, is that these are a couple, rich white guys in their 50s, and she is, a female Asian immigrant in her early 30s, and like they obviously, the power differential in those relationships between her and her boyfriend and her and her boyfriend's brother is huge. And so maybe even if he did come on to her, I can't imagine that, I don't know if it was taken seriously or how she felt like she could approach handling conflict in a situation like that where there's an obvious kind of power differential, really.
I have some real problem with the whole idea of an honor killing, like an honor suicide. So to me, I don't know a lot about that sort of thing, but just on the surface level, I don't think one would be naked when they did that. I think they would dress themselves nicely for that sort of thing.
Kind of like when samurai would do what was it called when they would like stick the knife in their guts and
I want to say there's a nice name for it, but harikari, but I don't know if that's right.
I thought it started with an I, like Iza.
There's I'm wrong.
There's like a specific term for it, but it is like an honor killing, and so I think to be nude in a culture like that would be dishonor. On top of like if they're trying to rectify what the issue is or to reconcile. I don't know if being nude is the way to try to get your honor back. And
to gag and bind yourself as well just seems really degrading.
Yeah, totally.
So the idea of an honor suicide, I can see a very distraught young woman doing something like that. But at the same time, like, okay, I get what you're saying about tying your hands up so you don't mess up. You actually do follow through. You complete the suicide. You complete it.
You can't chicken out. Yeah.
You can't chicken out, exactly. But gagging yourself, like she's going to hang herself, which means that her windpipe is cut off, and when you're choking or being strangled, you really can't make any noise because no sound, no air can go through your vocal cords.
Right.
So that seems unnecessary to me, unless
and her
she didn't realize that.
Her feet were bound too, and so what?
I'm sorry, the Asian porn thing. I'm on the side that this guy got some kind of weird fucking thing in his head. He watched some gay porn, Asian bondage porn.
Yeah.
Saw an Asian naked woman walking around.
Yeah.
She's probably very upset because of what's happened,
and she had just gotten that voicemail that the little boy was not
gonna die.
Was not gonna make it. Yeah.
And he might have gotten a similar voice. He might have talked to somebody on the phone.
Yeah, I mean, it was his brother,
Yeah, his nephew probably, he knows that his nephew
is not going to make it.
And now he's fueled with, because bondage porn, I mean, when you watch bondage porn, all porn is an act.
Right.
And a lot of people forget that. So if you're watching bondage porn and it seems like she's struggling, she's acting.
Right.
But to you, it seems like there's no consent.
Well,
as a viewer. So it can really muddy the waters with how people have sexual relationships.
Well, quite frankly, it's a very specific kink. When you watch porn, is Asian bondage porn the first thing that you go to? Like, it's a very specific.
No, it's not it's not what I'm into.
It's a very specific kink, and
I don't like to see women tied up. It's not my thing.
And it's just, I think, too much of a coincidence.
Oh, very much so. I'm surprised he even admitted it. He probably admitted it because they were going to find out.
Because they found it on the computers anyway. He did he copped to it first. But yeah, I think to head them off. Like, oh, this guy's so honest. Like, he told us that he, like, watched, he went to sleep early, got up, couldn't sleep, watched some Asian bondage porn, jerked off, went back to sleep. Like, what a truthful guy. Because they did find on the computers or whatever, on the servers, that someone had accessed Asian bondage porn at 3:00 in the morning.
I think that if this message on the door were written by Emily Dickinson, the only two words that would be in caps or capitalized would be he and her.
Right.
He saved him.
Or she saved him. Right.
Yeah, well, I'm thinking he is God. God saved him. The little boy is now in heaven. He's going to go to heaven.
Yeah.
Can you save her? Anybody. You is anybody who finds the body.
Uh-huh. Right.
And no, because I'm going to hang her outside for several hours, so no one's going to save her.
So let's speculate that Adam wrote this note.
Mm-hmm.
What is he trying to say? Or what does he want people to think about the crime scene?
It's a note. It's a suicide note.
Yeah.
That I don't get this. She saved him, though. Of him as a little boy, he's not been saved.
Although she found him,
She did.
But she didn't save him. She couldn't save him is what happened. If it was an accident...
Nobody could. He was too damaged.
Yeah, but even in that moment, she was in the house and she probably felt like she could have saved him from going over the balcony or something,
Mm-hmm.
My battery's about to die on my computer.
So, thank you for tuning in. This has been Demiworld. You can find us at Twitter and Facebook at Demiworld Podcast, or our website at demiworld.net, or anywhere podcasts live. You can also write to us and tell us how much of this we've gotten wrong at demiworldpodcast@gmail.com. And if you do like what you've been hearing, remember to like, rate, and subscribe. And thank you for listening.